I'm the board game captain, and today I'm going to be reviewing the role-playing game Mork Borg. Or at least I think that's how it's pronounced, I'm not really sure. I believe it means something in Swedish, but it doesn't actually tell you in the book. So I'm going to go with how we would pronounce it in English, which is Mork Borg. And this is a game that is published by Occult Ortmaster Games, Stockholm Cartel, and Free League Publishing. I'm going to show you all their logos right there on the back. And this is a game that was text and game design by Pelle Nielsen, and graphic design and art by Johan Noor and Dead People, which cracks me up. I'll get to that in a second. They use a whole bunch of, basically, they use a bunch of public domain medieval artwork in here, and that's why they say "and dead people," which makes me chuckle a bit. So when you buy a copy of Mork Borg, at least the way it came to me, it came, oh, and by the way, I did not buy this. I want to give a big thank you to Free League Publishing for sending me this review copy to read and check out and have fun with and do some content with. So the way it came to me, you got a copy of Mork Borg, you got a fold-out map, which I'm going to show you in a little bit, and you got a pamphlet. This pamphlet here, which is actually a adventure. It's actually kind of like a dungeon crawl adventure. There is another adventure in the back of the book, and I'm going to get to that in a second. So, and then of course you get the book. Now the book is has this nice like cover illustration with spot optics, gives you an idea of the very interesting art theme they've gone for, the very visceral kind of feeling they're going for. And it's hardcover, it's got a thread binding, it's got a cloth bookmark. Let me show you that there, which is very nice. The pages are super thick and glossy, which is very nice. On the back here, to give you a kind of idea of what you're getting into, you have the following text, which I'm going to read to you right now. It says, "A doom metal album of a game, a spiked flail to the face, rules light, heavy everything else." Then as a description, it says, "One day all will blacken and burn, just as the two-headed basilisks have predicted. The world is dying. Time is short. How will you face these last days? Grave robbing for soil-stained wealth, or facing down the apocalypse, hoping it can be fought?" All right. So what is this? This is a role-playing game. But it's very different than a lot of other role-playing games out there. And I'm going to discuss the kind of differences and what you should expect from this. But first, let me go over what's actually in the book. So when you open it up on the inside front cover, you've got a whole bunch of tables. And if you look in the inside rear cover, you have a bunch of other tables. And these are the sort of things you would normally see as quick reference tables inside of like a Game Master screen in a different role-playing game. So these are great. I really like that these are there. This is a big thumbs up for me that they included these for quick reference on the inside covers. It makes it really easy to find a lot of important stuff. So once you look at the quick references and you open it up and you move on, what have you got? You've got the title page, and then you have the storyline to the world. Now, this world is sort of like a Dark Ages or medieval world, fantasy world, of course, because there is magic and there is supernatural creatures. That in this world, they have reached the apocalypse in their equivalent to the Dark Ages or medieval ages. Seems to be really closer to Dark Ages to me. Generally speaking, the predominant religion of the world has to do with these two-headed basilisks, one of which who predicted the end of the world, and all that seems to be now coming to fruition. So the storyline is fairly light. They just kind of, they tell you about what the different areas of the world are like. Here's a map of the main continent you're in. They tell you, but they tell it in kind of like a weird sort of poetic way, and a lot of the pages are more illustration than text, like as you see here. And they just give you a gist. I have my first downside for this game right here is the storyline section, because it feels a bit anemic in the storyline. And whereas a lot of other role-playing games would give you tons of story and tons of explanation of the world, this is very light. It really relies heavily on the game master to basically fill the world. They just give you basic ideas. The entirety of the storyline of the world goes from page 3 to page 15, and a good portion of those are at least 50% illustration. The illustrations are great, and the look is awesome. I love the look of this, but it's not very heavy on story. But then I guess that's not really the point with this, and I'll explain that in a little bit. Also, a section that is conspicuously absent from this book, and is rather important, and I'll come back to it in a minute, is there is nothing in here that explains to you how exactly it is that you play a role-playing game. This book does take into account that this is not your first role-playing game. It assumes you already know how to role-play. So be aware of that. This is not for beginners. Now, then we get into some of the rules, and the rules are where I think this book shines more, because it's got some very interesting rules. So the first thing is the calendar of Necrobell, which, as you can see here, is done in foil, which is really cool. And this is the rules on how you take care of how quickly you come upon the apocalypse. You basically first decide with your players exactly how close to the end of the world is. And what you do is you decide what type of die you're going to roll every morning, every time there's a new day, to test to see if one of the other 7 seals has broken and brought you closer to the end of the world. So if you want it to be really close to the end of the world, you could roll a D4, for instance, and have basically roughly 1 out of every 4 times you will be that much closer to the end of the world. If you want it to be a longer campaign, you could go all the way up to, say, a D20 and have it, only 1 out of 20 times another seal is broken. But when you do roll a 1, regardless of the size die that you were using, you're going to wind up breaking another seal. And then you have these very interesting area over here. It took me a little while to actually figure it out, because it's fairly light on explanation in here, though the production is really beautiful, as I just showed you those foils. So that's a plus next to a minus there for you. But they have this interesting thing that looks like it's Psalms from like a religious text. And what you do is you roll a D66, which is you roll 1 6-sided die and a second 6-sided die. The first one is going to be the tens place. The second one's going to be the ones place. You get a number, of course, between 11 and 66, and that tells you what the new change has been in the world. And there are all sorts of interesting things that will now take place for the rest of your campaign. For instance, if you'd rolled 51, the lake and brook shall blacken and the water become tar. So from now on, all free-flowing water sources are tar. So you can no longer get fresh water from free-flowing water sources. The 7th seal will always be the 7-7, which is something you couldn't have broken. The 7th time you break a seal, it ends the world. That's it. The world is over. Then you move on, and the next bit in here is how to start making your character. So for character creation in this game, you've got a lot of options. You can do a very generic kind of character creation that they have here, but then there's also the option of choosing a class. You can also choose a class randomly by rolling randomly. There's a bunch of tables to roll on. If you don't choose a character class, you start by rolling on these item tables to see what items you start with. But if you do pick a class, it might alter your rolls on these particular tables. So a lot of the character creation, this is fairly random. So like you roll a D6 and see some items you get. You roll a D12 and see some items you get. You roll another D12 and see some other items you get. But if you, again, it would be a little less random, a little more directed, though still quite random, if you pick a character class. And I'll talk about those when we get to the character class part of the book. Now, after that, we have the explanation of the weapons. They are very simple in their explanation, as you can see here. So like a femur, which you use as a club, is just a D4 damage weapon. That's all the explanation it needs. And for how light these rules are, that really is all the damage it needs. Unarmed damage, punching someone, is D2 damage. A bow, for instance, would be D6 damage. So a flail is D8, you know, a big Zweihander is D10. Armor reduces damage based on the die it is. So light armor is minus D2 damage, medium is minus D4, And a heavy armor is minus D6. If you have a shield, it is just -1 damage static. Then there's tons of other equipment, and that can give you be able to use for certain tests and give you bonuses there. Then they have how do you roll abilities. You generally roll 3d6 and you check a chart they have here to see what your final ability score is. So of course the average on 3d6 is 10.5, which would put you right in on the table into a plus or minus 0 for that particular stat. So if you get lower than that, you're going to get negatives to your stat. If you get higher than that, you're going to get pluses to your stat, all the way up to the 17 to 20, which gives you a +3. Though through leveling, you can possibly get a maximum of +6 to your stat. I say possibly because it is not certain. I'll get to that when we get into the leveling up. For a test, what you basically do is you roll a d20, you add your bonus for that stat, your game master tells you what the difficulty is, and if you got equal to or higher than the difficulty, you succeed. So a normal difficulty is like a 12 on a d20. So if you have, let's say, a +2 to that stat, and you roll a 10, 10 plus 2 is 12, boom, you succeed. Done. Carrying capacity in this is based on your strength +8 items of normal size that you can carry. But you can carry up to double your strength +8 before being impossible to carry things. It's very light in regard to the rules for carrying capacity. Your toughness, your hit points is toughness plus D8 is your hit points. If you ever get down to 0 hit points, you wind up broken. So now the combat system in this, again, super light. So they generally recommend for initiative, you literally just roll a die, and on a 1 through 3, the enemies go first. On a 4 through 6, player characters go first. And then the individuals within that, you roll agility plus a d6 to see what order the player's going. Very simple. If you want to hit your target, you roll your melee, which is a strength test at difficulty 12. So if your strength is +2 and you roll a 10 or better, you're going to hit your target. That simple. Range test is your presence, difficulty 12, and defense, and this is interesting, monsters and bad guys never roll in this system. This is kind of weird. This is something I've not seen in other systems. So monsters and bad guys get 1 attack each round, and when it's their turn to attack, they'll be like, okay, I'm attacking your character. You roll your defense, difficulty 12. It's your agility. Agility difficulty 12. If you succeed, they miss. If you fail, they hit you. It's all your rolls. There are crits. Natural 20s on an attack will double armor and reduce the armor protection by 1 tier. A critical hit on a defense roll will give you a free attack back. A critical fumble, a natural roll of a 1 on an attack, you break or lose your weapon. On the defense, you take double damage and your armor is reduced 1 tier. Now, if you are reduced to 0 hit points, you'll be broken, not necessarily dead, but there's actually a fairly good chance you will die. And this is the sort of system where you're going to want to have backup characters if in case you die, because this is actually a fairly lethal system. So you roll a d4 when you're broken. On a 1, you're unconscious for d4 rounds. On a 2, you roll and check to see if you got one of your limbs severed or lost an eye. You have a 1 in 6 chance of having an eye out and a 1 to 5 chance of having a limb broken or severed. On a 3, you're hemorrhaging, which means you will die in D2 hours unless treated, but you have a difficulty class of 16 to treat hemorrhaging. So it's actually quite likely you're going to die from this. And in the final hour, the difficulty ups to 18. So that's a most likely dead. And then a 4 is you're just dead. You got killed. Hence why I say have backup characters for this system, please. Now, moving on. You've got how to rest, how to do test reactions from random characters or monsters you come across, whether they like you, they're helpful, whether they hate you, whether they attack on sight, how to test morale, things like that. And then that's basically it for the basic rules. Then we get into the different scrolls. Now that scrolls are how magic works in this. You collect scrolls, which are physical items, which you test to try to cast them, and then if you crit fail, there are crazy bizarre side effects that can happen. At the beginning of every morning, if you are a magic casting character, you roll your presence plus a d4 to see how many times you're allowed to cast spells or powers that particular day, which you can choose freely from amongst your various scrolls. Then there's a list here of random things if you do encounter one of the basilisks in the storyline that they can demand of you to do anything or tell you anything. There's not a whole lot given in, again, to running the basilisks in the story. They're sort of deities in the religion of the world. So if you want to run them, though, you are going to have to decide how they react to the players, and if they will be helpful and at all is going to be completely up to the game master. Then we get into a bunch of optional tables, which are very interesting. The optional tables involve all sorts of things you can do to better flesh out your characters. Things like terrible traits in regard to helping you to figure out how your character works. Broken bodies in regard to finding out if you have some sort of physical disability or ailing wound, as well as interesting psychological traits like you could be a nihilist or alcoholic or obsessed with eating bugs. Troubling tales you can roll on. This is to give your character their background or motivation on what they're doing in the world. Then we have over here my favorite table of the book, the Arcane Catastrophe. And I love the way they wrote this, because they split it up so you're never going to read it right the first time. And so, like, you look at it and you're like, Arcane Catastrophe, and then over the end of it, it says, you read it wrong, you illiterate fool. All right, that cracks me up. This book gets props just for this page alone. I'm just saying, it's funny. And then on top of that, the Arcane Catastrophes are hilarious. So it mentions that these are optional, but if you're playing this crazy game that it is, you're going to want to use this table. This is what happens when you roll a critical fail with magic. Now, there are some fairly benign, at least to you, effects here. There are some where it's just like you and a random nearby creature pass out. Okay, as long as you have your allies there to help you, you're going to be okay. But there's some that are just really odd and can be fun to roleplay. Like there's one where your teeth fall out and get replaced with long fingernails, which is freaky. They have some in here that become super bizarre. Like there's one where your skeleton becomes animated and keeps trying to get you killed so that it can turn you into a zombie, which is weird. And there's rules for it. There's rules for how that works, because your skeleton wants to get out of your body, and your bizarre miscast has made your skeleton become alive and want to kill you. So, all right, this table is freaking crazy cool and crazy awesome. Then we get into the actual characters, the character classes. Now, I do think it's a little weird that they put these so far back from the character creation area, but it is what it is, and they have some very odd character classes here. So the first one is Fanged Deserter. A Fanged Deserter is basically a fighter or barbarian type class. You actually have fangs and are ferocious. Then you have I mean, it's definitely all about fighting, attacking, but it's much more ferocious, because this is someone who's just as likely to literally bite your throat out as they are to fight you with a sword. Then you have the Gutterborn Scum, which this in other books might be like a rogue, except that, I mean, again, it gets much more gruesome than that. A common ability, which this is one of the weirdest abilities you could roll, is the Abominable Gobblobber, where they hock loogies in people's eyes. I mean, it's like really gross the way it's described, and in fact has an effect where you'll cause the person whose eyes you spit in to not just be blinded, but to start vomiting on the spot. And then there's a chance that everyone else who saw it will start vomiting. Greater effect on your enemies, but even your allies will start puking their guts out upon seeing you do this horrendous, disgusting thing. And then we have Esoteric Hermits. This is if you want to automatically be a magic user. This class here is definitely a magic user. Is going to start with some scrolls and definitely get to cast spells. probably the most likely to die first, thanks to the miscast table, so definitely have a backup character. Maybe another magic user, maybe not, that'll be up to you. Then we have Wretched Loyalty. This is like, you know, a rich person with some really cool items, but not heavy on the skills, because they lived a pampered life. Then we have a Heretical Priest. We have an Occult Herb-mancer, which is like, you know, someone who makes herbs and stuff randomly, which is kind of neat. It's okay. And then that's basically it for the character classes, and we get into some creatures. Now, the creatures are very rules light, again, because this game is very rules light. So, for instance, the first thing we have is a goblin. It's got 6 hit points, 7 morale. They have, their armor is ropey skin, which gives a negative D2 for their armor. They have knife and shortbow, which are D4 damage each. And as a special, they have quick attack and defense, which are a difficulty rating of 14 to, I guess, defend and attack them. It gets a little harder to hit them and a little harder to dodge them. In addition, they have values for them. So their head is worth 7 silver. A captured live goblin is worth 150 silver. A dead goblin is worth 20 silver. And then goblins have a curse, and this is the most interesting thing about them, where if they attack you and get away, there's a thing that can happen where you can turn into a goblin. Which is really weird. Then we have a few more bad guys and monsters. We have a scum, we have a berserker, we have a wraith, we have a blood-drenched skeleton, a lich, a troll, a zombie, a undead lady porcelain, undead doll. This thing is freaky. Oh my god, I think this thing might give me nightmares. There's a grotesque. There is the wicked knife wielder, which is a weird like undead construct with a lantern for a head. There's a wyvern, and then we have possible followers, and you can get a wicked wickhead knife wielder as a follower, as well as possibly a pale one and other weird creatures as followers. Then we get into once we're past that, we get into the sample adventure that comes with this, which is the Rot Black Sludge, or the Shadow King's Lost Heir is the name of the adventure. It is a dungeon crawl adventure where the King's heir has disappeared and has joined like a cannibalistic cult, and basically you're just thrown to the wolves in this dungeon where you have to fight monsters and cultists and cannibals, and eventually kill their leader and get the heir out to give back to the king. I don't know why he's so obsessed with his heir when the world is in the middle of ending, and the world will probably end before he dies anyway. But it's a storyline, and it gets you into playing the game. It gets you into playing the game in one of the 2 main ways I think that you will wind up playing this game, which is just going for it and just doing like dungeon crawls and various things without a whole lot of concern for story. But I'm going to get into that in a second. After that, we have, before we get to the back cover with all its tables, we have some tables that give you some adventure sparks, some ideas of why you might be hired or decide to go on a particular adventure. And then we have those back table pages. This book, before we get to those tables, is before the adventure, because the adventure starts its own like numbering system. Before we get to the last adventure, is a total of only 71 pages. There's not a huge amount of information in here. The system is very light and easy. Like I said, there's no section to hold your hand on how to roleplay, and there's not a huge amount of storyline in here at all. So, okay, pluses and minuses on this. Oh, before I get into that, let me run through. We have another quick adventure here. This one is called Ancient Skin, and it comes with it in a pamphlet. This one is a little more robust than the one that's in the back, but again is fairly light on the story. It's just like an encounter-based adventure. Not quite a dungeon crawl because it's out and about in a particular area, but it's a similar sort of feel to that. And then we have the big map poster, which I'm going to pull out here. And I'll show you. And it is a giant blow-up of the map of the world. You can put this on your wall if you like, or you can hold it out. I have it upside down because I'm an idiot. You can have it out on the table to show a map of the world to remind your players where they are. I do like that it comes with this. I think it's kind of cool. Not really necessary, but it's fun. I more like that it comes with an extra adventure because these really help you to understand what kind of game this is going for, which again is very story light. Now, you can try to go story heavier. There is a reference in here that there is the possibility of maybe changing the minds of the deities of this world, the basilisks, about the apocalypse, maybe saving the world. And there is a table in here on what the basilisk might demand of you if you were to ask information or a favor of it. But that is not likely, especially because, well, I mean, there's not really an explanation of in here at all of how to really do that. It would be up to you. If you as the game master want to fully flesh out a way to possibly save the world, maybe the basilisks decide to save it, but not revert the breaking of the seal so they could still end it later. That would be kind of up to you. It feels very unlikely that with the feeling and theme of this that you should have a happy ending. There definitely shouldn't be a happy ending. This is a grim, grimy, dark, vicious sort of feeling to this game. It feels more to me like this should sort of be a very nihilistic game. Like, okay, so this feels like you should go into this not feeling like I'm gonna save the world, but feeling like, screw it, the world's gonna end. Let's do what we want. Let's go rob those people. Let's go raid that dungeon. Let's go have as much fun and destroy as much and get as much as we can before the end of the game. The leveling up in this is very arbitrary. It's something I didn't get to go over before, but it's a very odd system where when you check to see at any point in which the game master decides that you've done enough that you guys should check to see if your stats adjust, you roll a bunch of dice to see if you roll higher than your hit points, and if you do, your hit points go up, and then you roll one d6 for each stat, and if you roll higher than that stat, you get to have that stat go up one. If you roll lower than that stat, it goes down one. So most of your stats, since most of your stats are going to start around 0 on average, most of your stats should start going up in the beginning, but as you do this more and more, on times when you've gotten lucky and you've gotten your stats all the way up to like 5s or even 6s, then you actually get very likely that those stats are going to come back down. And so it's a little weird. It's not really leveling so much as it is just adjusting, and also that's taking for granted you're going to live long enough for that to happen, because this system is very lethal. You might level up a couple times and then probably have to kill that character and get a new character in here. But that seems to be where this system kind of shines, is in doing this weird nihilistic, not really caring about story, almost encouraging you to kind of be a murder hobo and just do what you want and have fun and not care about morality or overarching story or saving the world. It feels very nihilistic to me. That is definitely the key word here. Okay. Downsides, I've said, storyline is very light. There could be a little more explanation on how to roleplay and how to do things in here, and there's not. Upsides, this is kind of like silly, throw all the rules out the window sort of fun. Bottom line, do I recommend this to people? This is a weird one, but yes, I recommend it. One, if you are a role player with a lot of games who likes to collect very interesting and out-of-the-ordinary role-playing games, this is a very interesting and out-of-the-ordinary role-playing game, and I would recommend that to you. Caveat, if you are not someone who already has played a lot of different role-playing games, I may not recommend this to you, and I definitely don't if it's your first role-playing game. This should not be your first role-playing game. But for those of us who have been in the hobby for a while, this is a cool addition to your collection because it's just so weird. And then on top of that, the book itself is just like a work of art. It's absolutely beautiful in a horrifying way. The tables are funny and bizarre. It really feels like a toolbox. I would say more than half of the rules in here are marked as optional. Everything is optional. It's just crazy. It's just everything in the kitchen sink and whatever you want to do and forget all the rules and do what you want and have fun kind of game. But with a really dark and gritty feel to it as well. So I do like it. My final rating I've decided on is I'm going to give Mork Borg a 7.5 stars out of 10. The only thing holding it back from being higher, like an 8, is I do feel like I would have liked more exploration into the world, more of a storyline there, and maybe even more of a storyline hint about how, if you wanted to stop the destruction of the world, how you might go about that. They just give a little tantalizing. You could maybe see about, you know, convincing the basilisks to save the world, but it doesn't really give you any idea on how to do that. I would like a little more of that. Though, again, you could do the work yourself. So I do like this, though. I do recommend it for your collection if you are a collector of role-playing game collections. I like that it comes with 2 quick, just run on in and hack and slash adventures, one in the back of the book and one in the pamphlet. And this is, again, a beautifully it's like a work of art as a role-playing game book. But again, dark art. I'm going to show you a couple of my favorite pictures here real quick because I just want to show you what I'm talking about in this. It's disturbing but beautiful. It's like you can't look away, but it freaks you out kind of situation. Which, yeah, I get a kick out of it. I do. It's really kind of weird and kind of wonderful. Weird and wonderful. That is what this is. This is weird and wonderful. So again, that is 7.5 stars out of 10 from me. If you enjoyed this review and tutorial, and you'd like to see me do more role-playing game reviews like this, be sure to give this a like, share it on all forms of social media, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Board Game Captain. That's Captain spelled with a K on YouTube. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns either on this video or on the game of Mork Borg, feel free to put them in the comments down below, and hit that little bell icon on my channel so you get alerts every time I upload a new video. And until next time, game on.